in other people's opinions. It is vital to rely on news platform with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York PARROT, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your products and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York PARROT, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the websites they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our news site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York PARROT is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
Good morning, everyone. Billy Bob here. I am with Carlo Parcelli and Ben Toth. We're expecting Scott Ritter to join us very soon. I want to first of all apologize for my red nose. I was itching it a lot last night, and it's kind of unsightly. Please ignore that. But yeah, we hope to have Scott here shortly. You know, he is the hardest working man in political analysis. He is everywhere all the time. And I expect that he should be dropping in shortly. But there's a lot of things.
There he is.
Speaking of Scott, yes. So, you know, the very first thing we wanted to get out of the way, we really wanted to discuss Scott's book. And I shouldn't say get out of the way. I just mean I want to get, we want to make sure to get to it. And if we start talking analysis, we might forget to come back to it. So first off, I know Carlo has finished the book. Ben and I have not yet finished, but you know, I did want to let Carlo give some, put him on the spot and have him give us his thoughts on his, you know, how we like the book.
Well, I'm not going to give you a book report, but I would.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say, well, first of all, the book is called "Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika: Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union" by Scott Ritter. And it's a personal account of Scott's experience in Votkisk, the Soviet Union at the time, and his part in the arms control treaty that existed. And what I found the book fascinating. And one of the things I liked most about it, and maybe Scott can tell the story, is when Scott was tasked, I'm speaking to him, was tasked with a job that was either setting up a party or clearing out the perimeter of the Votkisk factory so that they could look at the fence and make sure the perimeter was secure, that sort of thing. He had his own way of going about it. He got the job done. And one of the stories that intrigued me the most in it was the Solomonov device, and the way Scott brought the Solomonov device in through a U.S. Customs in New York. And maybe Scott would like to tell us a little bit about how he did that.
Well, you know, first of all, let's set it up. I was brought into an organization, the On-Site Inspection Agency, as one of the most junior people in that operation. Fact is, I was fired on my first day because I couldn't speak Russian to the satisfaction of the chief Russian linguist, and I had no experience whatsoever regarding, you know, weapons of mass destruction or inspections or anything. I was just this junior officer that the Marine Corps somehow thought could function in an environment filled with lieutenant colonels and colonels. The Solomonov device you speak of is what we call the stage measuring device. It is something that emerged The task we were given in Votkinsk only came into being less than a month before the treaty was signed. It wasn't meant to be. When the original treaty was negotiated, Votkinsk wasn't on the map. Portal monitoring wasn't part of the problem set. Nobody wanted to do it. One of the reasons why we got to zero in terms of the Soviet SS-20s was that we said, if you're going to retain any of these missiles, we have to monitor your production facility. And the Soviets said, that will never happen. We will never allow this to happen, except when in November, as everybody's getting this treaty ready to be finalized, the Soviets went, oh yeah, the first stage of that SS-25 missile that we continued to produce at Votkinsk, it's sort of the exact stage that was on the SS-20, which means from an accounting perspective, they're still producing SS-20 first stages, which is prohibited. So now what do? You can't shut down the SS-25. You can't shut down the treaty. Both Gorbachev and Reagan want to go forward with this thing. And all the negotiators went, hey, remember that thing that nobody wanted to do, portal monitoring? How do we do that? And the Soviets, desperate for a solution, said, okay, but now we have to figure out how to make it, because portal monitoring was just a theory, a concept. It was a model. It was a model built to be rejected. It wasn't a model built to be implemented. It was a model built to be rejected. And now they're saying, let's take this rejected model and make it reality. But we don't have time to negotiate. They're signing the treaty. So what they said is, everything will be determined later. And they signed the treaty. And then they spent the 6 months between treaty signing and implementation trying to figure out how to make it work. And they couldn't do it. It was impossible. One of the problems was, how do you determine that the first stage in there is actually part of an SS-25 missile and not something that's just being smuggled out and later reassembled? You have to get inside the canister, because it comes out in a launch canister. The SS-25, like the SS-20, is a missile in a launch canister carried on a big mobile launcher, big truck. The thing gets raised and fired. So we have to get inside. We were proposing this giant X-ray device called cargo scan. So basically, every missile that came out would have to be subjected to this cargo. That's a $12 million device, never been built before, totally theoretical, complicated, breaks down, and we want to build it in the United States, disassemble it, ship it to Russia, reassemble it in the middle of nowhere with no spare parts. And the Soviets and us were both going, that's a little complicated, got another idea? And they went, yeah, what about this stage measuring device? We open up the canister and we stick this thing inside. We got some optics and all that, and you can look for this tiny little metal band that connects the first stage and the second stage, and if it's there, then it's a whole missile. And we went, gosh, I don't know. That sounds a little complicated. And we had people look at it, the mock-up in May, but the decision was to take it out of the Soviet Union and send it to Sandia National Laboratories, which is the Department of Energy institution that has a big arms control division. And they would assess it and analyze it and determine if any modifications need to be made to make sure that it's being done right every time. Now, the interesting thing is, everybody knew about this but me, because I'm just a lieutenant. I'm not supposed to know anything. I'm the literal mushroom. You put me in a corner, keep me in the dark, and that's it. And so I show up at work one day, and you know, the Soviets had shipped this thing as we requested. They came in on a Pan Am flight, I believe, and it was supposed to land, and there was an Air Force plane coming in, a C-141, and they were going to take the crate off and put it on the C-141. It was going to fly to Sandia. Everything was all worked out, except nobody told Customs. And so this plane lands, and there's this big crate on it. Customs goes, what's in the crate? And the guys on board said, we have no idea. It's diplomatic. And they said, well, where does it say diplomatic? We're going to open it. And now the guy's saying, you can't open it. You got to call the on-site inspection agency. So because if you open it up, you violate the seal, which means you violate the integrity of the device. And now the whole thing is thrown up. So General LaJoy gets a phone call. General LaJoy is the commanding officer of the on-site inspection agency. They're going to open this up. He calls in Colonel Connell, a Marine Corps colonel, combat veteran, hero of the world, a legend. People fall down on their knees and genuflect as he walks by. He's held in that high of a regard, and he's my boss, who I haven't really met or known. And LaJoy turns to Connell and says, what do we do about this? And they were having this conversation in the hall, and Connell looks over, and I just entered the building, mistake number one, And Connell goes, Ritter, yes, sir. Do not move. Okay, I received a direct order from a colonel. I am not going to move. And he and the general go in, and apparently Connell said, we're going to send Ritter to New York, and he's going to unscrew this. And the general went, really? And Connell went, yeah. And the general went, good. And Connell came to me and he said, I need you to go to Washington National Airport, what we call Reagan National today, and get on the shuttle flight and go to New York, JFK. And when you get there, call me on a phone. I'll tell you what's next. I went, all right, that's my orders. So I did that. Boom. Even that was an adventure because I showed up at the gate and I said, when's the next shuttle? Because I told this is time urgent. They said, well, the shuttle's leaving. I said, no, stop that plane. I'm on national security business. I have to be on that plane. Stop the plane. Now, could you imagine doing that today? A plane's pulled away from the gate and some lieutenant saying, stop the plane. But then people went, sure. And they brought the plane back and I got on the plane and they flew and they landed. Meanwhile, people are already starting to make phone calls. Hey, why is this lieutenant in here stopping airplanes, citing national security? What the hell is going on? So there's already a buzz going on back in. But now I land in New York. I make the phone call and Connell says, okay, go to the customs building. There's a crate in there. Your job is to get that crate on a C-141 aircraft. The crate cannot be opened. Let me emphasize that again. It cannot be opened. You understand? Yes, sir. He said, he has to get on the airplane. That plane has to be out of here as soon as possible. Yes, sir. Well, I walk into the customs place, and the customs guy looks up and he goes, I don't care if they send in the whole damn Marine Corps. I'm not letting this box go. And I'm like, well, that's a very confrontational approach. I haven't even said a word yet. And I don't know what to do. I said, I need the box released. Not going to do it. I have to inspect it. I said, you are not going to inspect the box. And literally, I would have killed him had he tried to inspect the box. Those were my orders. So we already had a standoff. He's not touching the box, but he's not releasing the box. And we got this standoff. How do you break the standoff? I can't threaten to kill him, really, because that's illegal. I'd go to jail for the rest of my life. So I decided to bluff. I had a meeting the week before with Colonel O'Neill, who was the White House scientific advisor. And he gave me a business card that said the White House on it with the White House telephone. And I went, all right, this is the president's treaty. And I told the guy, I said, this is the president's treaty you're screwing with here. I don't care. I said, you're going to care. Because what I'm going to do right now is call the president. I'm going to call the White House and I'm going to give him your name. I'm going to say, you're screwing the treaty. You're violating it. You're causing an international incident. And then what he's going to do, he's going to call your boss at customs. And then what your boss at customs is going to do, he's going to call that phone on your desk right there. And that's a phone conversation you do not want to have. Because it's going to ruin your day, ruin your career. He's like, huh? And so I pick up the phone and he's looking at me like, yeah. And I start dialing. And I'm like, holy crap, if somebody answers this phone, I don't know what's going to happen. But one ringy dingy, down goes the lever. And the guy goes, look, let's talk about this. Would you be willing to sign for the crate? I said, I told you that. I will sign for this crate. You will put your signature on a document and take all responsibility for this crate. I said, yes. So he pulled out a form. I filled it out. I signed for it. And he said, crate's yours. Have a good day. And I got the crate. So I go out and there's the Air Force guys. And I say, get the crate on the plane. And they did. And I said, now I'll stay here till you take off. They start to taxi out and the plane comes back. Crew chief gets off and he goes, we're stacked up. We ain't leaving. There's planes coming in. They don't have room for us. We're going to be here for hours. And I went, no, you're not. You're taking off now. They said, we can't. We're stacked up. Then I remembered another meeting I had gone to with the FAA at State Department where we were talking about when Soviet airplanes enter American airspace, how do they get priority under the treaty that they're And so what happens is they would be redesignated upon entry with info, INFO, then 001. They'd be given that call sign. And that would tell all traffic controllers to clear the airspace. Here comes this treaty-related aircraft. So in my mind, I said, that's a treaty-related aircraft. I said, I am redesignating your airplane, info 001. They said, can you do that? I said, yes, I have that authority. I did. But they redesignated it, info 001. They got on board, and I'm on the headset as they're doing this, and the guy goes, I don't know what you did, but it's magic. We're out of here. I said, great. Meanwhile, airplanes that are starting to take off, stop taking off. Airplanes that are starting to land, peel away, and above the sky is just full of airplanes stacking up all up and down the East Coast. I screwed up the traffic pattern big time. But my plane takes off, and it's gone. I accomplished my mission. So I go back, get on the shuttle, and I'm flying back to Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the Customs is calling the White House, asking why a Lieutenant Ritter from the On-Site Inspection Agency is using the president's name. The White House is calling General LaJoy, saying, "What the hell's going on? Ritter's running wild." The FAA is calling the State Department, saying, "Who invoked Info 001? The Soviets are." This was in June. They're not supposed to come in July. Why do we have an Info 001 call sign? Who did that? Lieutenant Ritter. So now they're calling in there. So you got everybody calling General LaJoy, and he's going, "What the hell has happened?" So he's getting ready to fire me. So I arrive, and I'm told, report to the general immediately. Colonel Connell steps up. He says, I told him, I said, I did this, but there's going to be some issues. He said, "Go home. You accomplished the mission. Let me take care of this." And he went into the general and basically said, "You told me this crate had to get on an airplane and get to Sandia. Is that right, General?" The general went, "Yeah." And he said, "And you told me this had to be done. Is that right, General?" "Yeah." So I gave it to a Marine and told him it had to be done. "Yes." "And he got it done." "Yeah." "And you want to do what to him?" And so the general forgave everything. And I just got a good reputation for getting the job done no matter what. But I did get lectured to later on about, risk management. Sometimes you can't always go to war to accomplish something. But as a junior Marine officer, every problem is a war. And that was just one of a bunch of stuff that I did at my time in OSI. It was a great opportunity because it allowed a junior lieutenant, to be treated like an adult. Lieutenants don't normally get this kind of opportunity. They're normally hidden. And at the On-Site Inspection Agency, I was given the opportunity to do some very, very important stuff. And I was judged on my ability to accomplish the mission, not based upon the rank on my shoulder.
Buy this book. If you want to hear more like that, read more like that, this book is full of great anecdotes, and it's very informative about it. What I found intriguing about it also was the kind of fly by the seat of your pants setting up this whole situation, because it hadn't been done before. And I really thank you for the opportunity to gain this knowledge. It's called Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. The subtitle is Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union. Buy Scott's book. You won't be disappointed.
Can I just add one last comment?
Oh, sure.
Is it's not just a history of the treaty, and that alone. Let me just say this: this is a book that 3 years ago wouldn't have been allowed to be written by law. The treaty stipulated that any participant in the treaty can't publish anything about it without consent of both parties. But when the United States withdrew from the INF treaty and then the Russians withdrew, that clause went away, and I was allowed to write this book. There is no book, account, or anything like this. This made use of not just my experience, but a unique archive of primary sources, the daily reports, the weekly reports, the memorandums, the notes for the record, everything from both the Soviet side and the American side. It is a unique treasure trove of primary resource material that nobody else has access to. And it allowed me to reconstruct in minute detail, what we were doing. So, I didn't have to sit there and go, I can't really remember what happened on that day, but I'm going to sort of make it up, as a lot of people do when they write memoirs. I had everything that happened, notes, the whole thing. It is the most accurate account you're going to find. It's the only account you're going to find of this. But it's not just about the treaty, although that story alone must be told for a number of reasons, most important of which is to show people that there is a mechanism for resolving difficulties between the United States and Russia. It's through arms control, and that we can work our way through the most difficult of problems. But it's also a history of perestroika that will not be told anywhere else. One of the interesting things about being in Vodkinsk is, Vodkinsk was a closed city. no foreigners were allowed in there. And we were the first foreigners in there since the revolution, except for some German prisoners of war who built some buildings along the Prude, the lake. So when you're in a closed city and people don't have to fear outside influences, the society is actually very open. I mean, the concept that people have about Soviet society being this closed control thing, no. It's a very open society. They do a lot of talking. And then the other thing that happens is glasnost came, the policy of openness, which means that the press could start digging in and talking about things. They had a newspaper called Leninsky Put, The Way of Lenin. Lenin was a big player in this town. There's a big statue of Lenin still to this day in the town square. But Leninsky Put and Elvira Bukharin or something of that nature. I'm getting old and forgetful, but I spelled her name correct in the book. She was the editor, and I tell you, she behaved in a way that would put a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist to shame. The way she dug in, once she realized she had the authority to start asking questions and digging into stories, they started to do a critical examination of communist control of the city, of how the city functioned, why things were working, why things weren't working. And she published this in Leninsky Put. She had a great crew of reporters that went out there, and we subscribed to it. We got to read it, but not just read it, but then we got to go out into town and see what she was talking about. So it was a window into perestroika from the beginning of perestroika all the way through, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, and this was taking place as we were doing this amazing thing at the factory, this amazing change. And it wasn't all for the good. In fact, most of the change was for the bad. And yet she's reporting on it accurately. And this book is a unique history of those times that I think must be read for people to fully understand, what the Soviet Union was going through in its final moments and what the reality was when Yeltsin took over in 1992 or 1991, 1992, and the problems that were faced by Russia for the next decade that were inherited by Vladimir Putin. Today, we just pretend like none of that happened. No, it happened, and this book records, in a lot of detail. I mean, some very intimate detail, the lives of the Soviets, and that's the important thing, because I think it brings the Soviet Union to life, and it brings Soviets to life, which means it brings Russians to life. And that's an important thing, for people today to understand, that Russians are human beings. They want the same thing we want. They want the same life we want. They have the same cares and concerns. They love their wives. They love their husbands. They love their children. They're good people, fundamentally good people. And this book captures that. I mean, and they're humans. So there's the good, the bad, the ugly. Nobody's perfect. This book captures that, captures Vodkinsk and all of its glorious imperfection, and brings it to life for the reader. And I think anybody who reads this will be empowered to understand not only what arms control is, because we literally were writing the book about an important concept in our on-site inspection that had never been done before, but also about Russia, about the Soviet Union, about Russian people, Russian society, Russian life, and the interrelationship between the two. Because the final phrase under there is arms control and the end of the Soviet Union. I don't want to give away too much about the book, but let me put it this way. The missiles produced at Vodkinsk, one of the missiles in particular, was responsible for the August 17th, 1991 coup against Gorbachev. And if you want to find out how that happened and why that happened, read the book.
Yeah, it's an excellently, thoroughly researched book. You are a fine writer, and I strongly encourage everyone to buy it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Scott, I think of you as the James Brown of political analysis. You are definitely the hardest working man in political analysis with your writing. You got your books, your articles, you're everywhere all the time doing these interviews, and we really appreciate you coming on. It's such a, you provide such a service to, the American public that the mainstream media, does not do. So, we really appreciate it. we had, there's a lot of things going on since we talked last. There was quite a bit of different topics we wanted to get into. From your perspective, what is the latest breaking changes and shifts going on with the situation in Russia and Ukraine?
Well, we are coming to the final moments of the mobilization of the 300,000 reservists that were called up back in September. And this will be, we've talked in the past about, when in May, NATO and the United States infused billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars worth of military equipment into Ukraine. I called it a game-changing moment. And I was heavily criticized for that. People went, "Oh my God, you're a flip-flopper." I said, "No, I'm an analyst. I'm a professional analyst." And when you fundamentally alter the data that's being put into a problem set, if you don't sit back and reevaluate what conclusions are drawn from this data, you're not a very good analyst. And so I looked at it and I went, this is a game-changing thing. And it was. It fundamentally changed the entire scope and scale of this conflict. Turned it from a Russian-Ukrainian conflict into a conflict between Russia and the collective West. It empowered Ukraine to carry out offensive operations against a Russian military that wasn't built to withstand an onslaught from a NATO military, which is what they were now facing. But Russia adapted, they overcame, they mobilized. This mobilization, when viewed from the current perspective, isn't just a game-changing event, it's a game-winning event. The game is over, the game is won, Russia will win. I've always said this, but this mobilization of 300,000 not only puts the NATO reinforcement into check, it puts in the checkmate. And I'll tell you why I say that. There's two things. We've talked about this before. I've talked about military math. You've heard me talk about military math. We're going to talk about military math again. Two basic concepts. First concept is a burn rate. That is how quickly you churn through manpower and equipment. A burn rate. The second concept is replenishment rate. How quickly you can replenish manpower and equipment. And here's the key. If you have sufficient forces to the task and your replenishment rate is greater than or equal to your burn rate, you will be able to accomplish the task. Ukraine's burn rate is astronomical. Huge. They're burning through 500, 800, 1,000 men a day. Their equipment, all that tens of billions of dollars of equipment that was provided to them, most of it's been destroyed. The rest things that haven't been destroyed are broken and are either on the ground in Ukraine, not functioning, or in Poland or Germany, Czechoslovakia, or I'm giving away my age, the Czech Republic, being repaired. They don't have an armored force anymore. Their artillery is out of ammunition and their manpower is bleeding out on the battlefield. Their burn rate is outrageous. Their replenishment rate is minuscule. To show you how pathetic this replenishment rate is, one only needs to reflect on General Zaluzhny. He's the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, who spoke with The Economist back in November, I believe. And what he told The Economist, I mean, he's a general, so he's a little cocky, like all generals are. You don't get a general. And he said, about the Russians, I can beat these guys. Okay, I mean, you're a general. You better think you can beat them, or else I'll find someone who believes. But, he said, but in order to do it, I'm going to need 300 tanks, 500 armored fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, and unlimited ammunition. I mean, as soon as I heard that, I went, wow, flashback, Downfall. You know the movie Downfall? Very famous movie about Hitler's last days in the bunker in Berlin. And there's a famous scene there where Hitler's sitting there looking at the map and he's surrounded by his generals. And Hitler's going, I need Steiner to move this way and Vink to move this way. And I need the army to come in here. And we need to do this and this. And then we can win the war. And the generals are going, there ain't no armies there. You got stuff on the map. There's no reality. You got no army. It's over. And what the general was saying, Zaluzhny, was, I don't have an army. I mean, think about it. What does he need to win? An army. He needs 300 tanks, 500 armored fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, unlimited ammunition. He needs an army, a magically appearing army. You give me that army, and I can win. Well, geez, wow, General, so can anybody. I mean, if we could just magically conjure, if it was a computer game, we could come in and hack the software, and I could hit the button and spin up as many tanks as I wanted. I could make them invincible if I wanted. But that's not reality. Reality is the Russians are killing Ukrainian tanks. They've killed all your armored vehicles. Your artillery's dying out. You have no ammo. So how are you going to beat the Russians again if you don't get this army? And here's the interesting part, because he was honest. He said, if I don't get what I'm asking for, we're going to lose. Wow. The commanding general of the Ukrainian armed forces basically said, if I don't get this army, we're going to lose. Now, Zelensky was there. The interesting part about this interview is Zelensky was there and he didn't say a word.
Yeah.
But then Zelensky.
I hate to interrupt you. We got to interrupt for a break, but we'll get back to it.
Yep.
Sorry.
No problem.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you.
Hey.
So, Scott, we didn't mean to interrupt, but we have that hard break at half an hour. So thanks for hanging out. And do you want to pick up from where you left off?
Yep, I'll hit the unpause.
Okay.
Okay. And I think I just talked about Zelensky his need for this magical army, and that Zelensky had been present at at this interview, but didn't say anything.
Yeah.
But then Zelensky's moment came. You see, Zelensky carried out his Hollywood moment. He went to Bakhmut. We don't know if it was really Bakhmut. He said it was Bakhmut. We don't know. He met with the heroes of Bakhmut. It's funny because the average battalion that goes into Bakhmut within a week suffers 90% casualty. That's dead and wounded, and the remainder are just totally broken up physically and can't think. But here he's meeting with guys who look healthy, wealthy, and wise. And he hands out medals, calling them all heroes. And of course, one of them hands the medal back and says, "You're going to America. Give this medal to Joe Biden." And then they sign a flag, and they give Zelensky the flag. "You're going to America. Give this flag to Nancy Pelosi." So he takes his little things and he gets on an American Air Force plane that flies into Washington, D.C. But the script wasn't meant to be Zelensky comes and tells America what he needs. The script was Zelensky is providing political cover for a lame duck session of Congress that is trying to sneak a $63 billion appropriation into the budget before a new Congress comes in who might question that figure. The votes were already counted. They knew what the votes were, but now they need to protect themselves from the American public that might be outraged by this happening, especially if questions are asked later on. So they need Zelensky to come in to provide political cover. His job is to give the medal to Biden in the White House and then to give the flag to Nancy Pelosi as he delivers what apparently was the greatest speech ever made in Congress. Those aren't my words. It was the words of Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who said that speech was the greatest speech ever delivered in Congress in the entire history of the country. Zelensky gave the greatest speech ever.
He's Churchill.
Yeah, Churchill. He is Winston Churchill, baby. He's not. The interesting thing, just a little aside here, for the greatest speech ever in the history of Congress, I challenge anybody to tell me what he said. He didn't say a damn thing. Excuse my language.
He said what he's getting is not enough and he needs more, Scott. That's great.
He said that in a side conversation. You see,
oh, yeah, you might be right.
The president tried to tell him that, because remember, the speech wasn't written by Zelensky. The speech was written by the CIA, who's been putting words in Zelensky's mouth since the very beginning. Remember, I don't need a ride. I need more ammo. Zelensky never said it. It was written by a CIA officer at the U.S. Embassy, and the CIA admits it today. Yeah, we wrote that. Zelensky didn't say it. He doesn't say anything. He's incapable of original thought. He is purely a puppet. Except that here, he heard General Zelensky say he needs equipment. And he's going to Biden, and Biden's again, we're going to give you a Patriot missile battery. You mean the missile that doesn't work? The one that didn't shoot down any Iraqi Scuds in the Gulf War? The one that shot down more Allied aircraft than Iraqi missiles in the 2003 invasion of Iraq? The one that couldn't defend Saudi Arabian infrastructure from drones thrown by the you're going to give us that one? One battery? One whole battery? One whole battery. Wow.
In
Thanks.
2024.
Pardon?
Latest military news is those will arrive in 2024. By the way,
Of
hi,
course.
Scott. I'm the Eastern European, so I sound different.
Ben Toth. Is that Hungarian?
Hungarian, yeah.
I know a little bit. But no, you're right. I mean, first of all, it takes 5 months minimum just to get the basic training out on a Patriot. And then it takes even more to turn that basic knowledge into operational knowledge. So 2024 makes it, there won't be a Ukraine in 2024. That's pretty much my prediction. So it's a throwaway. But even Zelensky said, hey, you see, we're getting hit every day. Every day we're getting slaughtered. Our infrastructure's out. Our energy's down. We don't have good air defense. Could you give us 2 Patriot batteries? That'd be nice. And Biden went, nah, you don't understand the script. You get 1, and it'll be in 2024. And so sad, too bad. Wouldn't want to be you. But then he turned around and he tried telling other people, I need tanks. I remember Zelensky, he said tanks and armored fighting vehicles. I need all that stuff. And he was told, no, stick to the script. Your job is to come here and provide Churchillian moment. And that's it. And so Zelensky left knowing that he's been hung out to dry, knowing that America doesn't want him to win, that he's being used for purposes. And this is the reality. So now we come back to what we were originally talking about, burn rate, replenishment rate. There is no replenishment going on for the Ukrainians. I mean, now there's some talk, the Americans are saying, maybe we'll give them some M2 Bradleys. Good luck with that. Maybe we'll get Greece to find some old Soviet era stuff. Maybe we don't know what we're going to do, but maybe we'll do something. I don't know. Why don't you give them the new German infantry fighting vehicle? They got 18 of them. They don't work. So maybe the Germans can give those to the Ukrainians. But the bottom line is Ukraine's got nothing. There's a promise by Europe to train, I forget what the number, 8,000 men every 4 weeks, every 8 weeks. But that's fine and dandy, except that let's say they're losing 800 men a day, and that number is going to go up when the Russian offensive starts. Let's say they're losing 800 a day. So in 10 days, they lose 8,000 men, and you're going to replenish them in 4 weeks. I'm a simple Marine. I don't know much. I can count to this many. But I do know that if I'm losing 8,000 men every 10 days, and you're replacing them every, 4 weeks, 7, 14, 21, 28. Every 28 days, I get a new 8,000 that eventually I'm going to run out of men before you can give me even one. I lose that equation. And that's the fact. Now we come to the Russians. Their burn rate has been small. But let me talk about small for a second, because I think some people get a miss. Let's say for a second the Ukrainians are losing 800 men a day. And let's say the Russians are having their best possible ratio, 1 to 10. It's probably a little bit less than that, probably closer to 1 to 8, 1 to 7. Let's say it's 1 to 10. That's 80 men a day. Now, 7 times 8, I know 8 times 8 is 64, minus 7 gives you 56, maybe 50, something like that. So that's 560 a week. In America, our will was broken when we lost 200 men a week in Vietnam.
Vietnam, yeah.
The height of the Vietnam War, when the fighting was the heaviest in Vietnam, we were losing 200 men a week, and it broke the spirit of America. The Russians are losing 550 guys a week. Think about that.
Yeah, and
Think
the
about
numbers
it.
were fudged
And
during
pardon?
Vietnam.
Yeah, the number. But what I'm trying to say is, we can talk about the Russians having a low burn rate, but it's a damn high burn rate. It's higher than anything we've suffered since Korea or World War II. This is probably higher than Korea even. This is a very high burn rate for the Russians. But, the thing is, they can replenish it. They have the 300,000 reservists that are finalizing their mobilization. Plus, in addition to that, there's about 120 plus thousand volunteers who are coming in during this time period of time. So you have probably close to 500, 500,000 guys coming in. Some of them have already arrived, strengthened up the defensive lines, solidified them. Ukrainians aren't going to make any breakthroughs. Even if they received everything they wanted, they couldn't. But they got nothing. They're being ground up in Bakhmut. But now the Russians are going to have the final 125, 150,000 guys show up. These guys are finalizing their training back at the training camps throughout Russia. Now they're being organized into formal combat formations like battalion, they call them BTGs, battalion tactical groups. There's going to be 10 to 15 division equivalents of these BTGs showing up, 10 to 15 division equivalents showing up. They're not armed with old equipment, they're armed with the most modern equipment. The Russians, surprisingly, to the West, have been producing the T-90 tank, the T-80 tank, the advanced models, T-90 M3, T-80 M3, T-72. I don't know, that this has a lot of numbers now. It's MB2, 3, but it's the most advanced version with the most advanced gizmos, fire control, survivability, all that stuff. They're getting thousands of these tanks. Ukraine's getting none. So the Russian replenishment rate is huge. So when you compare this basic military math, high Ukrainian burn rate, almost zero replenishment rate, high Ukrainian or Russian, low Ukrainian Russian burn rate, high replenishment rate. When the Russians decide to kick this offensive off, there's literally, as General Zaluzny said, there's nothing we can do to stop it.
Scott, let me jump in.
Sure.
Jump in there. I mean, basically, we're familiar with this. The Rasputicha is gone, meaning all the ground is basically going sub-zero right now. There's enormous forces. What's on everybody's mind here? And, you know, with recent history of, I think, France jumping in, that we want to mediate the conflict. And the Russians said, no, you can't. You've been on the belligerent side for all along. What happens after the military or the country economically? What happens after the collapse? What does the USA do? What do the Poles do, who are just aching to do something? That's really what's on our mind today. Well,
let me put it this way. The Russians, you know, we've had 10 months to evaluate the Russians. You know, we did a snapshot at 1 month. You know, in March, everybody's saying, what's going to happen? Well, gosh, we only got 1 month of data, but let's try and predict what's going to happen. You know, in April, 2 months of data. You know, May, 3 months, and we're getting more and more data. Let me put in perspective what I think is perhaps the most important data that came out of this. The admission by Petro Poroshenko, by Angela Merkel, and by Haaland, the president, that they are lying sacks of manure. That when back in 2014, when they pleaded with Vladimir Putin to, because a lot of people don't realize this, that when Minsk, the Minsk Accords in 2014 were signed, the Russians had surrounded a good portion of the Ukrainian army. I can't, Devinsk, or there's the name of the village, but around 8,000 guys are surrounded. They're all going to die. They're literally going to die. And the Ukrainians pleaded with Germany and France to save them. So Angela Merkel, and she talks about this, it was the most difficult moment of my life. I had to fly here, there, everywhere, and I had to talk to Vlad, and Vlad had to come, you know, and we finally met in Minsk, and we got this agreement. It was wonderful. Well, the Russians bought into it because they said, you know, okay, you want a peaceful outcome? We'll do that. I mean, Russia didn't want the Donbass. If people have to remember that in 2014, they didn't want it. Why? Well, gosh, you know, Putin had been working pretty hard since 1999 to rebuild Russia from the debacle of the 90s. And he had gotten Russian standards up pretty high. I mean, if one only takes, you know how you can get cards or photos and you can get emotion? If you took every Russian city and took a photograph from 1999 to 2022, the same place, and you went, you'd watch garbage turn into wealth. You'd see the city transformed into a modern city, clean city, modern buildings, modern infrastructure, modern roads. Russia is a great country. It's a great country. It's not a perfect country, but it's a great country. Ukraine, on the other hand, just collapsed. It's, can't say that word. It's garbage. It's poop. Just the opposite. If I did you'd watch a society in collapse, crumbling. So The Donbass is the same thing. It's got a lot of potential, but to incorporate the Donbass, Putin was being told by his economists, don't do it. This will screw up the Russian economy like you wouldn't believe. We can't afford to do this. We don't need it. We don't want it. What we need to do is protect the rights of the ethnic Russians there, but we need to keep Donbass in Ukraine. And that's what Minsk was supposed to do. Create constitutional amendments that protected the rights of the ethnic Russians in the Donbass while preserving Ukrainian sovereignty over that region. That's what Putin bought into. So this notion that Putin's land hungry and power hungry and all that. No, he said, yeah, that's my plan. But now we know that neither Merkel, Haaland, or Poroshenko wanted that. What they wanted was to buy time. For what, you might ask? To buy time to build or rebuild the Ukrainian military using NATO equipment, NATO training, so that they could successfully prosecute a military campaign against the Donbass and against Crimea. The whole purpose of Minsk, from the Russian perspective, was peace. The whole purpose of Minsk, from the Western perspective, was war. And what's more important now, we go back a couple more years to April 2008, when William Burns, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, current CIA director, wrote a memorandum called Niet means Niet. At that time, there was a lot of talk in NATO about bringing on board Ukraine. And he wrote a memorandum and said, time out. Let me just tell you what the Russians think about this. If we bring Ukraine in, this will lead to a series of escalations that will ultimately result in Russia militarily intervening in Ukraine, and Ukraine will lose the Donbass and lose Crimea. This is the U.S. ambassador predicting the future in 2008, saying, don't do it. When a U.S. ambassador writes a memorandum of this sort, it's read by everybody, considered by everybody. It's not put into the shelf and forgotten. Everybody read it and everybody went, nah, we're going forward. Knowing, therefore, that go forward, you are going to war. Now, a lot of people, when I first brought this up, they said, Scott, come on, you don't mean that. We now know it's the truth. How do we know it's the truth? Because they brought Ukraine, they tried to bring Ukraine in November, conflict in 2014. Instead of seeking a peaceful outcome, they sought an outcome that allowed them to continue to prepare for the war that they knew they were going to engage in 2008. This is the truth about what's going on in Ukraine. This is a concerted effort by the United States, by NATO, to use Ukraine as a proxy force to wage conflict against Russia. End of story. There's no debating this anymore, because I will put the three leaders on the stand and their own words will convict them. And it's not just their words, it's the deeds of the United States. We now can put into a proper perspective what was going on at that training camp that the United States set up in Western Ukraine in 2015, where every 55 days we trained one Ukrainian battalion to NATO standards and sent them east to fight the Russians. Nearly 30,000 troops were trained in that facility. There were two other facilities that carried out similar training levels. We're talking about training 60 to 90,000 Ukrainian troops to NATO standard. For what purpose? We now know. Go to war against Russia. End of story. It's no longer a discussion about that. So the Russians we're looking for peace. Now we talk about as it goes through, how do we evaluate this? We need to understand, and let's also bring up April 1st, Istanbul meeting. Again, a lot of people you can't put it in perspective on April 1st because we didn't have the confession of Merkel and Haaland at that time. So on April 1st, we thought the Russians were playing games. We thought the Russians were playing diplomatic games. It was the Russians' fault that this all collapsed. No, it was Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of England, NATO member, flying in under the instructions of his NATO partners to put the kibosh on yet another Russian effort for peace. See, the Russians wanted peace. The Russians didn't want all this stuff to go to hell in a handbasket. That's why it was a special military operation. It was a special military operation because they didn't want war. They wanted peace. But they got war. They tried to get peace on April 1st. Now we talk about where we're going today. Let me tell you where we're going. Russia will never trust the West to negotiate an outcome to this conflict. Vladimir Putin has said, I will never, it was codified as yours. And you know what? Germany and France should be kicked out of the United Nations for that because they're lying. You know what's. But the fact is, Putin said, I learned my lesson. I made a mistake in 2014. I trusted the West. I tried for peace. They wanted war. Right now, Russia has all the advantages. They're not going to give up these advantages, not going to negotiate them away. This is a war that will be won on the battlefield. Jan Stoltenberg said, this is a war to be won on the battlefield. Well, guess what, Jan? Russia's going to win it on the battlefield. They're going to win it decisively. But they will manage escalation. The last thing Russia wants this war to cause or provoke Polish intervention in Western Ukraine, Romanian intervention in Moldova, NATO intervention in Ukraine. So it will be a managed victory. And we're going to see a military campaign that I believe will accomplish the primary objective, that is not only securing the Donbass, but also now securing Kherson, Zaporizhia, which is Mother Russia under Article 64 of the Russian Constitution. They've been annexed, brought in. So all of that territory will be recaptured. All the Ukrainians on that territory will die or retreat. And then they're going to push it back another 150, 200 kilometers so that never again will a Ukrainian artillery shell be able to land on Mother Russian soil. And in the process, I believe they're going to take Kharkov and absorb Kharkov. They're going to secure all this stuff in the north, and they have the forces to do it. Ukraine can't stop them. There's nothing in the Ukrainian arsenal to stop them. Then they're going to pivot south. And here's the important thing. I think they're going to accomplish this. Billy Bob, you always tell me that you have bold predictions. Well, I think they're going to accomplish this by early summer. And by early summer, they're going to be prepared to move on Odessa. But then they're going to have what I call the Odessa moment. And the Odessa moment is the master stroke of de-escalation. And Vladimir Putin hinted at this. If you remember, there's a Hungarian journalist, Valdai, who asked the question about Odessa. And Putin said Odessa can either be the key to peace or the key to the resolution of this. Odessa is a Russian city, historically Russian city. The Russians don't want to destroy it. Odessa and control of that coast, Ukrainian access to the sea is key to any post-war Ukraine economic viability. And so Russia will be poised to take Odessa, push up to Transnistria, the 400,000 pro-Russian people in the Moldovan breakaway republic. But they're going to pause, and they're going to turn to the West and say, now's the negotiation. But it isn't a give and take. You're going to accept our terms, all of our terms. And what we're giving you is the ability for Ukraine to continue to exist as a modern nation state, access to the sea. But in exchange, you're going to do everything we've asked: denazification, demilitarization, no NATO, etc. Yes or no, you got about 24 hours to decide. And if they say no, wham, it's over. Russia's going to run in, sweep the field, because what Russia can't do is create a vacuum of uncertainty in southern Ukraine, where NATO says, hey, if we act now and fill that vacuum, we could stop the Russian incursion. So Russia's going to give everybody pause, offer a diplomatic solution. If it's accepted, great. If it's not, Russia will complete the job. And the job, I think, will be completed by the end of summer, early fall. The military fighting will be, I think, over by that time. What's left is the political cleanup, and that could be messy depending on how things go. But you asked the question, where do I see things going? That's where I see things going.
Great answer. And you brought in Jan Stoltenberg, who said a victory for Russia is a loss for NATO as a whole, which I agree with him on. So what did they do? Not Ukraine, but NATO and Washington. What are they desperate enough to do something very stupid? I'm just curious.
Well, there's politicians like Stoltenberg who don't know anything about anything. And then there's military professionals who are sitting there in Brussels saying, we can't do anything. We don't have the ability to do anything. What about the 101st Airborne Division? 4,700 light infantrymen? You want to put them in the heaviest ground combat seen in history? How many artillery pieces do they have again? 36. And you're going to put them up against a Russian tank force that has thousands, tens of thousands of artillery pieces? That's about the dumbest thing in the world. What about the 2nd Armored Division Brigade in Poland? Wow, 5,000 guys, 100 tanks, no sustainability, no artillery. Again, 36 pieces of artillery. No, NATO's got nothing. Germany doesn't function as a military. Literally, they don't function. They had to cannibalize everything to get that reinforced battalion put up in, I think, in Lithuania. Their new vehicle doesn't work. They're getting ready to fire their defense minister because she's incompetent. She's destroyed the military. But all of NATO's like that. NATO has no capacity to wage offensive ground operations. So why would NATO get engaged in an offensive ground operation in Ukraine that they're going to lose? And they know they're going to lose. Even if they could get the troops assembled, they don't have the ammunition sustainability. The British say we're going to be out of ammunition in a couple of days. NATO will be out of ammunition in a couple of weeks. The Russians will never run out of ammunition. So no, NATO's going to do nothing. That's like the key thing for NATO right now is how do you prevent NATO from collapsing? You see, because there's a big impetus now. The French are at the head of it to focus on European security priorities as opposed to American security priorities. There's many people starting to recognize that this Ukrainian conflict was foisted on them by the United States, and that the United States doesn't have Europe's best interests in hand. But I think NATO is going to be struggling for its own survivability in an internal dogfight that's going to transpire once they're yet again embarrassed. Because remember, they were embarrassed in 2021 in Afghanistan. That embarrassment should have been fatal to the organization, but then they tried to revive themselves through the Ukrainian conflict. Now they're going to be humiliated. And I think they're going to be left at the end holding an empty bag, wondering how expensive it's going to be to refill this bag. And even if they refill it, do they have anything more than a bag of poop? So, NATO is going to be fighting for its long-term viability, survivability. And here's where Russia comes into play, because Russia said their whole goal, we're here focused on Ukraine. Russia's whole goal has always been to negotiate a new European security framework with the West. And Russia will continue to pursue this goal. And Russia knows that can't be a one-way street. It has to take it if they're going to ask or demand of Europe to respect Russia's spheres of influence and national security interests, then Russia has to respect Western spheres of influence and national security interests. So I think you're going to see Russia putting a fair deal on the table that's going to make it difficult for the European nations to continue to use NATO as a vehicle of confronting Russia. They're going to have to learn how to live with Russia.
I hope your optimistic outlook is accurate, Scott. I really hope so. I think there's definitely some people that would like to escalate, that want an excuse to get the West on a war footing and get some kind of big industrial mobilization towards war, global war going, and hopefully they lose out. Hopefully the smart people that actually know what's going on don't let those politicians do that, for sure. Scott, I know you have probably another 5 programs to do today.
Today's a writing day.
Oh, it's writing day today. Okay. Well, thank you for sacrificing this hour to be on our program. We love having you. I don't want to take the last word, but we are running short of time here. Does anybody have any other?
I was just going to say it was a pleasure to meet you, and say hi to Maverick from
Oh,
he's over there sleeping.
from this guy here who is called.
Oh, okay. Nice.
No pets, Carlo.
I just want to thank Scott for coming on again. It's always a pleasure, and I always learn so much. I so much admire your hardline stance on the Nazi question. That strikes home with me, and I really appreciate your taking that stance.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yes,
Thanks for inviting me, guys. I really enjoy coming. You might be wondering, why does he keep coming back? Because I enjoy it. You guys are great. I enjoy the conversations. I think that there's just value added to this, to the overall debate, discussion, and dialogue that is produced by this program. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate.
Thank you again. Take care.
So we're not in charge of closing the show. We don't have that capability. We have a producer, but it looks like he's here. So everybody, thanks for watching. We will be live next week at the same time, Thursday mornings, 9 a.m. West Coast, noon East Coast time. So MUTIU, if you want to close us out, we're